No doubt. All right, so let's bring in Nick from KSR. Nick, we appreciate you taking the time today, man. I know you got a lot going on. How's it going in Lexington?
It's going well. I hope the weather cooperates better than it did in week one. We haven't had weather delays very often, so waiting till 10 p.m. to start a football game, it wasn't ideal. But Kentucky did play well in the small sample size. You didn't get to see as much run from some of the younger players in the second half, but once the engine got rolling, they played pretty well after those first two series.
Yeah, I went back and watched the game, man. I thought for a game one for Kentucky and all the just disjointedness in terms of stopping, starting, they executed pretty well on all phases of the game. It felt like just from my end. But I know we got you for an abbreviated time here, so let's dive in. Other than pace of play, I know they're going to be much quicker in terms of trying to get in more snaps, more reps. What can you tell us about this new offensive scheme and maybe how it's a little bit different than what Kentucky's tried to do the last few years, Nick?
Well, I think the biggest difference is in the run game. You didn't have the quarterback run game available with Devin Leary, and Brock Vandegrift certainly bringing that. The Georgia players told us he's not a slider, and Brock confirmed that in his debut. He took quite a few shots early on. And then the other part of it is they just don't have a guaranteed bell cow back where you've seen Benny Snell, Chris Rodriguez, Ray Davis last year, guys who take a lion's share of the carries and carry a heavy load. We were expecting Ohio State transfer Chip Trainum to most likely fill that role, and then he broke his hand about halfway through training camp. So he's out Saturday. He'll probably be out for another week or two. And so they're having to run back committee, which last week meant that Brock Vandegrift had 5 carries. I think the receivers had 5 carries. And then the running backs, all 3 of them, they've got 2 freshmen and NC State transfer and Demi Sumo-Karmbe, who combined for, I want to say, 9. So that's a lot different in that you're not just going to feed it to one guy up the middle, run a lot of inside zone stuff. They're using jet sweeps and the pitch passes to try to attack the edges to soften up the middle. But the other stuff, you probably won't notice it, those changes, where it's the verbiage is a little bit simpler. And I think Bush Hamden is much more – the way he communicates to his players, it's not you don't have to know the entire offense. Just know your job, do it. I'll set you up for success. Whereas Cohen, if you were going to play for him, you had to know everything. And I think that made them play a little bit slower. So the Cats were pretty crisp once they kind of got into a flow and a rhythm on Saturday. And I really like what I saw. They were able to connect on a few deep shots with Jamori Macklin, a North Texas transfer. He looked really good in that capacity. So, and I think the biggest thing that you'll see Saturday going up against the edge rushers from South Carolina is they're going to do a lot to try to move Brock around in the pocket. He looks more comfortable when he's on the move, when he's rolling out off of play action than he does in the straight drop back pass. So I think that's part of the reason how they're going to try to attack those edges and protect Brock, because if there was one thing I came away with particularly concerned, it was the amount of pass rush that was able to kind of put pressure on Vandegrift in week one.
Nick, tell us a little bit about this Kentucky defense. In some ways, I feel like we could say very similar things every year. They're big, they're long, they're physical.
Mm-hmm.
They play hard. But what do we need to know about the defense this year in terms of their identity? Maybe anything that's different from what we're accustomed to, if anything.
The biggest difference from 23 to 24 is how they'll attack you on third down. Last year, they had pretty much an entire new secondary. There were some safeties that had minimal experience, or really their first time being full-time starters. And then the cornerbacks didn't have any experience. Maxwell Harrison emerged as an all-SEC type player. And because they have more experience there, they're a little bit more comfortable saying, hey, go out and play out on an island on third down. Man up, and we'll bring some pressure. That was the biggest weakness to Kentucky's defense last year. They were just so bad on third downs. They were 12th in the league, I think 109th in FBS in third down defense. They just couldn't get off the field. And so after the second drive, they gave up a 3rd and long on a blown coverage, and they gave up another 3rd and 8. they didn't give up another third down the rest of the game. So where their strength is, though, and it's why I think Kentucky has an advantage against South Carolina, is it's in the run game. I mean, everybody knows about number 0, Deion Walker, but that is a big, stout defensive line. And more importantly, the linebackers have a ton of experience. They're instinctual. They're fast flying to the football. Pop Dumas Johnson, he was All-American for Georgia a couple of years ago. De'Aaron Jackson's really good at stopping the run. And even the guys behind him, when they came into the game, the backups, David Rayner had a pass breakup on a third down, and Alex Afari moved from nickel inside. He bulked up, and he had a couple tackles for a loss. So this linebacker unit might be the strength, especially against the run, which I think is really going to make it challenging for Dow Loggins to try to generate any sort of offense for the Gamecocks on Saturday.
Yeah, and that's a great point. Obviously, it's the Carolina offense that's built very differently than the one last year with Rattler and Leggett and those guys. Nick, what's the vibe in Lexington right now? I'm sure most fans were pretty happy with the win last week, and I know Carolina fans have circled this game. I imagine Kentucky fans have circled this game a little bit. It feels like it's a rivalry almost. It's budded out of nowhere the last few years. Are Kentucky fans smelling blood in the water a little bit after Carolina's narrow win? And how much bourbon tasting will there be for this fan base before this one? Like, are they going to be good and jazzed up for this one?
Well, you saw the fans, despite the delay, it was lightning around the area. It wasn't rain. So they stayed in there. They got rowdy. They were ready to see their team. They're going to be even more fired up because, like the head coach, they do not like Shane Beamer. The whole sunglass thing that happened a couple of years ago, that's left a bad taste in their mouth. And it's kind of funny because for years, I got the sense from South Carolina fans, they couldn't believe that they were losing to Kentucky. Cats won 7 of 8. Now the Cats have lost 2 in a row to the Cocks, and they're like, how are we losing to Shane freaking Beamer? This dork who goes on every podcast in the world, we cannot lose to this guy. And so there's a good amount of pressure, I think, packed into this game. But Mark Stoops, he's had his teams geared up in SEC openers. Last year against Florida, that place was packed. That place was on fire. And then Ray Davis went and ran for 280 yards. I want to say that they've won 5 straight SEC openers outside of the COVID year. So they'll be ready to play, and they're expecting to win. I mean, if you want to get where you need to go, you got to beat South Carolina. There's no way around it. And a lot of it, I think, is going to come down to how good can this offense be? It looked sharp. They tended to answer some questions in that Southern Miss game, but the South Carolina front is significantly better. How is Kentucky going to be able to score points? Can Brock Vandegrift, can he be the guy we think he is? That's the big question that needs to be answered Saturday afternoon at Kroger Field.
Nick, real quick on special teams, I saw Southern Miss made kind of an ill-advised decision to go for a fake punt right at the end of the first half that Kentucky stopped pretty easily and then converted that into another touchdown. But that aside, tell us about the kicking game for Kentucky. South Carolina has their punter back, Kai Kroger. They're breaking in a new kicker. If this is a close game, maybe that factors in. What's the kicking game look like?
Alex Rayner, the place kicker, was brought in from Georgia Southern a year ago, and he only missed 1 kick, and I think it was blocked. I mean, he's been a steady Eddie, Mr. Consistency. And then if they got to go long, the freshman they brought in to eventually replace him from Montana, he made multiple 60-yarders in fall camp. So they've got a big leg guy if they feel they need to go to him. The return unit, I mean, just you can't kick to Barry and Brown, and Southern Miss, they try to pooch kick to stay away from him. And a freshman tight end took the ball 20 yards and started it on midfield. So really the only question mark is at punter, where Wilson Berry struggled a year ago. They brought in a new punter who has a bigger leg, but Mark Stoops liked the consistency of Berry a little bit more. So that would be, I think, the shakiest part of special teams is in the punting game. But outside of that, they're pretty darn good. I mean, they were kicking the ball out of the end zone. When they didn't, it was getting tackled inside the 25. So I would consider special teams a strength of Kentucky's, especially if the ball somehow gets in Barry and Brown's hands, because 1 out of every 8 returns in his Kentucky career has been a touchdown.
Okay, that's a pretty good stat. Nick, we're gonna let you get out of here, man, real quick before you go. Give us maybe a key or two to victory in terms of like a couple things that you think could maybe just shape how this game plays out?
One of them is going to be incredibly boring, and we could say it every single Thursday, Friday, and that's take care of the football. Over the last 3 meetings, Kentucky's -6 in the turnover battle. In Kentucky's last win, they were in South Carolina territory a ton and just kept fumbling the ball over. Last season, Dane Key gets stripped when he gets into scoring territory. Kentucky's got a chance to go either tie or take the lead with less than 2 minutes to play, and Devin Leary gets stripped from behind. So taking care of the ball is paramount, especially when I think your defense got an advantage like they will against the South Carolina run game. You can't give them short fields. You just can't do that. So turnovers, that's the boring answer. But the other part of it is how well does Kentucky Brock Vandegrift? Does he have time to get the ball off, or are Stewart and Kennard, are they going to create a bunch of havoc in the backfield? That to me is the story of the game. If Vandegrift's got time to find his receivers, I think they'll be able to move the ball. Those are the two big things that I'm going to be looking for Saturday. But ultimately, if you want a prediction from me, I do think Kentucky gets the win, something like 24-10, 24-14, something like that.
Hey, Nick, we appreciate the time as always, man. We'll let you get back to it, but enjoy the game Saturday. We'll talk to you soon, okay?
Appreciate y'all having me on.